Good evening. We get started, I guess. I hope you all know me, Robert Harrison from the Department of French and Italian. And actually, Tobias Wolff is the one who is in charge of tonight's session in the sense that he chose the book and he is going to lead things off. I'm here just to make a preliminary announcement. I'll introduce Inga in a moment, but we have, for those of you interested in the spring reading, we have a very unusual selection, which is a 17th century French novel, La Princesse de Clèves, by Madame de Lafayette, and we have a distinguished visitor coming from Yale who has written extensively about this book about seduction. It's, the French aristocracy. And when you're dealing with the French aristocracy, there's like 3 titles to every character. And so I just want to warn those of you who pick the book up to not be turned off by the first 20 pages. Because the first 20 pages is very disorienting. You don't know who is who exactly, and yet if you can get past that initial barrier, the novel becomes quite interesting, and it takes us into a completely different world than the ones that we've visited so far. Here in another look. We have this distinguished professor from Yale, Pierre Saint-Amand, who will be one of the participants. We have also a PhD in my own Department of French and Italian, Chloe Edmondson, who will also be a participant. So it promises to be a very informed and lively discussion, and that will be taking place on May 1st. There are copies of the book there that you can purchase, and so I hope you will all join us for that. Tonight we're going to be discussing Walter Tevis's The Queen's Gambit with Inga Pierson. Those of you who were here for the Frankenstein discussion, remember Inga Pierson, who is an Italianist, got a PhD from New York University, was a teaching fellow in Thinking Matters in IHUM here at Stanford, and a visiting assistant professor in my Department of French and Italian. And Toby, who was here for the Frankenstein discussion in the audience, thought that Inga would be a very interesting person to have join into our conversation. Tobias Wolff, I'm not going to introduce him. I've introduced him too many times to this audience. So, but what I'm going to do is just turn it over to you now, Toby, so that you can lead the discussion.
Okay. Is this on? Yes, you can. It's on. Robert very kindly invited me to choose a book for this winter session, this winter meeting. And I didn't hesitate for a moment to suggest this book. And in fact, I had already recommended it to Robert just when we were having lunch one day, and he really liked it. And it came to me through the recommendation of a friend of mine, Stephen, who is one of those people. I hope we all have someone like this in our lives, whose recommendations are kind of gold standard. He's never disappointed me. Whenever he's recommended a book, and he kind of makes a point of recommending books that he thinks I probably haven't read. He's always right, and they're always as good as he says, and as distinctive. And so I fell in love with this novel. I read 2 of Tevis's other novels, which I liked a lot, especially The Hustler, which some of you will have read. If you haven't read it, you've certainly seen the movie, which is very true, actually, to the book. It's a very lean, dark book, beautifully executed. This one, for me, plumbs depths that the Hustler doesn't. There's there are just so many things about this book that strike me. First of all, his picture of the world of chess, the whole culture of chess, the tournaments, which really, when you look at them, aren't that glamorous. They're in junior high schools and in seedy ballrooms in hotels. All the beauty that takes place in here is in really the minds of the people who are playing, and the elegance of their confrontation with this old game. And one of the striking features of the book for me is that Tevis never shows off in his writing. There's never a self-conscious line, a self-consciously poetic line. It is always clean and visual. You know exactly where you are. You know exactly what you're seeing. You're never confused. And yet the effect overall has a kind of poetic resonance. And the picture of Beth Harmon, you usually want to, we all want to love the main characters of the books we read. It's a weakness of ours. And think of all the great books that we wouldn't really be able to read with the love that we read them with if we held ourselves to that kind of an idea. Say The Stranger by Camus. Meursault is not really that lovable. But he's so real, he is so actual and complex on the page that those kinds of considerations fall away, and you're in love with the actuality of what's in front of you. And Beth Harmon is that kind of a creation for me. He feints in that direction by making her an orphan, because we all are on the side of an orphan. Going back to Oliver Twist and before. And yet Beth is not, makes no attempt to ingratiate herself with us. She's a survivor. She does the things that survivors have to do to survive. So the Tevis doesn't really try to sentimentalize our relationship with Beth at all. She's even kind of, in some ways, a cold fish. It shocks us when she is actually moved enough by the death of her adoptive mother to kiss her corpse on the cheek. There is, after her time with Benny in New York, when he's coaching her in chess, and they finally have slept together. Nothing that particularly impresses Beth. And as she's leaving Benny, she thinks, well, there wasn't really anything else he could teach her. There's a very instrumental relationship she has with people, just as you would think. I think that Tevis took on tremendous challenges in writing this book. For one thing, just to create a world that, as he does at an orphanage, and then the whole world of chess leading on from that. Just think of the sheer invention involved in creating all the games that he creates in here between people and giving them drama. And how does he do that? Well, we're not all grandmasters in here, I suppose. And the way he does that, I think, is in a couple of ways. Unusually in a novel, we don't just get the thoughts of the character, we actually get the texture of the person's thinking. The motions of their mind, we feel that. The other thing that really drives this novel, which is, I think, very interesting, great literature has been written, of course, about our struggles with a person's struggles with the outside world, nature, other people, war. It seems to me that the greatest literature is about the struggles that we have with ourselves. And that is the real driver of this novel, is this war that Beth has with her own inclination to self-destruction. It begins plausibly enough because she can't sleep in the orphanage with the taking of those green pills, which obviously becomes an addiction over which she really has no control, and or bare control, and then leads naturally enough to alcohol, and it's her and those things. It isn't just alcohol and drugs. It is an inclination to darkness. She is terrified of chess. Actually, she thinks at certain moments about its endlessness, about falling into an abyss that chess represents, because it is so endless, so infinite. What did you say, Robert? After the first 4 moves, there were 300 million possible moves?
It's up 30.
30 million. There is a kind of abyss in this game, and that struggle with herself, which is not articulated in that way, but you feel it as a pulse constantly. It's a tension, it's a thin wire she's walking over through the whole of the novel once it really catches, and that drives us forward, and that anger in her that you feel. Is that going to get the better of her? She even wants to annihilate that little boy she's playing. She gets angry when the Russian chess magazines that arrive at her house she discovers are in Cyrillic. That makes her angry. I love her fury in here. It's often rather arbitrary, but it's defining as well. But that drive to win that you feel in her, that desire to dominate, annihilate even in her. All of us who have played chess, I'm not even a very good player, but I like to play now and then. I was taught to play by a ranked player who shared a house with me when I was in college. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and all day long, he sat in his bathrobe in his room. He was doing a PhD in philosophy. He was writing an attack on the sense datum theory of a philosopher named A.J. Ayer, who was going to be one of the overseers of his of the committee that examined him later. Never got out of his bathrobe. He sat all day playing chess with himself. He went over and over again, especially the games of Jose Raul Capablanca, who gets prominent mention in this book. He taught me to play, and we must have played. We lived together in this house for a couple of years. We must have played 1,000 games, 1,500 games. I beat him once, and he has never forgiven me for it. This is true. He lives in Seattle. We get together now and then. We'll go along for a while, and we were really close. We dated sisters. We had adventures together all through England and in Europe. So I just feel this heavy silence whenever we get together. And then he always says, he's really not aware that he does this. He'll say, "You know that was a fluke, don't you?" And so I've had a taste of that, just that much of a taste of that chess player's desire to annihilate. Well, that's just a little introduction. I'm very curious to know how Inga and Robert, how this novel struck them. Inga?
So I was thinking something you said about the elegance of the game, and that's what really struck me. And I mean, unlike you, I found Beth really sympathetic. I
love her.
But I wanted, I guess I felt like I could identify with her in these moments of anxiety and in these moments of exultation when she has. And part of the reason I felt that was the descriptions in this novel. So that's sort of what I wanted to focus on, just to start us off. Because as I was reading, I was thinking a lot about how writers work, or how a novel comes into being, how it takes shape, the way words are arranged, the importance of description. And it made me think of an essay by Roland Barthes, a French structuralist semiotician, written in '68. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's called L'effet du réel in French, or the effect of the real. And it's basically an apology for literary description. And he takes as his example, because for the structuralists, and none of us really need to know what structuralists do, but it's okay. For them, it was a problem when descriptions didn't contribute to the plot, or didn't create atmosphere, or mood, or do something, right? And so Barthes, it's a little gem of an essay, because he sort of goes through the history of description from the epideictic, thank you, to ekphrasis, which is the description writing that resembles a painting, to another word that's hard to say. Let me look here. Hypotyposis.
I don't know.
Which is the Latin word for a vivid or picturesque description of a scene or event. Okay, and then he also makes this distinction. So the real was important for historians writing history. For the domain of poetry was something quite different, verisimilitude. And verisimilitude originally had no real need of the real. But that changes, he argues, beginning in the 19th century, and that we need these indicators of the real, that the verosimilar, or verisimilitude, begins to require these little pieces of the real peeking out through descriptions that serve no other purpose than to say, I'm real. And his example is, of course, I'm sorry, yes. I'll move the scarf. There we go. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, sorry. So his example is, of course, Flaubert. Now, my companions here have persuaded me against starting with Flaubert. So I'm going to get straight to Tevis. And the passage that made me think of this essay by Barthes is on page 91, if you have your books. It's one of the first tournaments that she and her adoptive mother, Mrs. Wheatley, go to. And they're going to Houston, and it's Christmas. So I'm just going to read from, it begins on the bottom of page 90. Their Christmas dinner was microwave turkey served on an airplane with a complimentary glass of champagne for Mrs. Wheatley and canned orange juice for Beth. It was the best Christmas she had ever had. The plane flew over a snow-covered Kentucky, and at the end of the trip, circled out above the Gulf of Mexico. They landed in warm air and sunshine. Driving from the airport, they passed one construction site after the other. The big yellow cranes and bulldozers standing idle near stacks of girders. Someone had hung a Christmas wreath on one of them. It was that last sentence that just struck me. So to imagine those stacks of iron, steel beams, and one of them, a Christmas wreath is hanging from them. That has no effect on the plot, but nevertheless, I was thinking, what does it do? What is this effect of the real? And it's something like giving us the virtual reality goggles that immerses us in the virtual experience of the novel. This indicator. Yes, all of a sudden you're there with her driving through Houston and seeing that Christmas wreath on the beam. So I started to think more about description and the functions. And in all of these chess games, for the same reason we have during a game, we hear that an older man is wearing, that a younger man wore a gray sweater over a white shirt, and that he unbuttoned his shirt sleeves and pulled up the sleeves to his elbows, one arm at a time, not taking his eyes off the board. Or do you feel like you're getting into that game with him? Or that Beltic, waiting for a lesser player to move, he's bored, right? He yawns, and Beth could see, and I'm quoting, that his teeth were bad with dark stains and empty spaces, and that his neck wasn't properly shaved. But these things are amazing, and that's what draws you in, and that's what, if you don't even need to know how to play chess to really enjoy the novel. Because I have to say, I did not play chess, and this novel has got me into learning to play. So I don't have any ranked players teaching me. I have a couple high school students with very smudged glasses. But, let's see. Okay, then the other thing I was noticing in the writing is the use of similes. And they seem to have another function, which is to evoke this sense of wonder, something that like the way a child's mind works. So let's look at, this is another great passage on page 87. This is one of those chess bums that Toby mentioned. And this guy is never named, unless you all noticed a name. I was hunting for his name this morning and I couldn't find it. So she's at another tournament in Cincinnati. But I just love this. And she comes upon this guy, and he picks up the white king pawn with his fingertips with surprising delicacy. Okay. Then he asks her about a move, and she says, if you take the knight, it doubles his pawns. And this is his response. Big deal, the man said. All pawns and no hope. Here's how to win with black. He left the knight in the center of the board and played black's pawn to king 4. Then he continued laying out the moves of a game, shuffling the pieces around on the board with casual dexterity, occasionally pointing out a potential trap. The game built to a balanced fugue in the center. It was like time-lapse photography on TV, where a pale green stalk humps itself from dirt, heightens, swells, and explodes into a peony or a rose. This is marvelous.
Yeah.
Synonym. So you start to imagine, like I said, you don't even need to know how chess is, because thanks to similes like this, all of a sudden you imagine exactly what's happening on that board. Let's see. At another point, she says she's playing a woman, Annette, and she's sitting at the board with her elbows on the table, and then Tevis adds this simile, like the Russians she'd seen in photographs. So it gives us this insight into her psychology there, which we don't get in any direct manner, as you mentioned, right? But there we get a sense of, this is somebody who wants to be a chess grandmaster. At another point in the novel, she says she's listening to the kids in the high school talk about what they want to be when they grow up, what they want to study, and she said she had no interest in those conversations. She already was what she wanted to be.
That's a great line.
At 14 years old. It's amazing. And it's true. It's perfectly true. But here you see her, that ambition, but also that childlike aspect of her personality that she doesn't lose despite all of these gruesome experiences. And then this is another one of my favorites. The little boy in Mexico that she's angry because he's really giving her a hard time. And she even makes a concession at a certain point, though. She goes, this is probably how all those people felt when they were playing me when I was 13, right? So again, those are little lines like that make her very human and sympathetic. And she talks about him. Little Jirev in Mexico is wearing a light blue shirt, and it's stuck out from his elbows like the edges of a child's kite.
Yeah, isn't that great?
But also gives you the sense of a boy who's in an outsized game and situation. And this is the last one of the similes I'll read. They're like the names. She reads the Sicilian defense, the Levenfish, the dragon, the Najdorf, all those variations. They're like incantations to her, or the names of saints.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to call your attention to was the idea of how the author brings feelings alive. So these are the best, suffering from anxiety, which I'm sure many of us, I think all of us know what anxiety and stress feels like. But these descriptions were so on point. She's just taken a pastry off the cart in Paris, and she catches sight of Borgov. And her stomach turns to ice. Perfect. And this is another one that you also mentioned. This was another passage that you alluded to, where she feels the endlessness of chess. So this is when she's preparing in Mexico for the first meeting with Borgov. And she's in her hotel room and she can't sleep. Her mind is not only, I'm quoting, this is page 128 if you have your books. Her mind is not only dizzied, but nearly terrified by the endlessness of chess. She sat in the green armchair for hours, feeling that she might fall from a precipice, that sitting over the chessboard she had bought at Purcell's in Kentucky, she was actually poised over an abyss. And here's the best part. Sustained there only by the bizarre mental equipment that had fitted her for this elegant and deadly game. Suspended there by the bizarre mental equipment that had fitted her for this elegant and deadly game. It's amazing. It's stunning. And I'm going to end in just a second. But so by contrast, there are these wonderful descriptions of confidence, of when she feels confident. And one of those is in San Francisco. The flowers, she's leaving the tournament there, she's just won. The flowers in her hands glowed crimson. Her new jeans and cotton sweater felt fresh on her skin in the cool San Francisco air. At the bottom of the street, the blue ocean lay like a dream of possibility. Her soul sang silently with it, reaching out toward the Pacific. You would think that it has nothing of the cliche in it, and yet in the economy of 3 sentences, he gives us this feeling of exultation, of confidence, of peace, of freedom. Okay, no, wait, I did have one more point, which is about the beauty and the sensuality of chess. So I think, I don't know if any of you, at a certain point, she's interviewed by a woman from Life magazine, and she's asking her, she's very disappointed by the questions of this is Mrs. Jean Balk, who's asking her if she has a boyfriend. She says, I'm 14. You know, she wants to talk about chess. And she muses to herself, you know, I wanted to tell her how beautiful chess was sometimes. And I don't know if any of you have seen, there's a great film called A Queen to Play. Has anyone seen that? It's a French movie by Caroline Botaro. It's available on Amazon Prime, so if you haven't seen it. But the chess player is a woman, and she's a chambermaid. And she discovers the game when cleaning a room, and she stumbles upon this couple who are engaged in a very sensual chess match. And the camera is panning on their hands and their faces. Right there are these close-ups of their hands, their faces. And I was thinking that there's a lot about chess that is very intimate in that way, because you need to understand, first of all, you're sitting in close proximity to the other player, and you need to be in their mind, predicting their moves, right? And you're using your hands, and there are these passages where she talks about picking up the pieces, right? The way the pieces feel in her hands. And I think that's one of the things that made me want to play. My students were saying you should play online, and I said, no, because I want to feel the pieces in my hands. So, and for her, chess is far more exciting than sex. She has both of those encounters that end in a very disappointing manner. This is after she has one of these intimate encounters, and the next day they wake up and it's just sort of disappointing or uneventful to her. And the next day they wake up and the combinations as she's playing with this guy arose from her fingertips and spread themselves on the board as prettily as flowers when playing. Amazing. I think
that's a poetic. That's the one sentence that, in my mind,
prettily as flowers.
Hit a false note because it's poetic in a writerly.
Yeah.
Drawing attention to the writing. I think he should have edited that out.
Well, actually, it reminded me of the simile in the epigraph from the Yeats poem. And that simile it's a piece of a poem about thinking in which Tevis is comparing her to Helen of Troy. And the last line is, like a long-legged fly upon the stream, her mind moves upon silence. So all those little similes brought back to my mind the epigraph. And I was thinking about, and I've said this 3 times, but this is the last point that I will make. You can cut me off, Robert, sorry.
No hurry.
No. Is that I puzzled over this for a moment, because this Yeats poem is about thinking. So there are three stanzas, and the first one's about Caesar. And the last one's about Michelangelo painting the ceiling, painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And this middle one is about Helen of Troy. So I'm thinking, Beth and Helen of Troy. But the way the poem speaks here is about how she's a natural. She's a natural beauty. And that makes sense because Beth, she's a natural when it comes to chess. There's this unconscious unconsciousness about her playing. It just arises from her being and appears as soon as she sees Mr. Schabel. So I ended up really loving that connection.
Yeah.
So I read a somewhat different book than.
Not surprising.
I would point to one moment in class, when she's very good at math, she's the top of her class. The literature class, she cannot stand the study of literature, and she cannot stand poetry. When the teacher then is reciting they're rather cheesy lines that were in vogue at the time, but nevertheless, Tevis will quote just 2 or 3 verses. She said, "It was stupid."
Yeah.
In her mind. And obviously this girl has no use for poetry whatsoever. And in my view, there's nothing poetic in her, let's say, her disposition, in her manner of perceiving the world or being in the world. There is something perhaps poetic in the way she plays the game. And the style of chess that she engages in is within the tradition of what's known as romantic chess. So this much I will concede, that romantic chess is associated with, above all, the 19th century. It's actually correlated with Romanticism. Associated with Paul Morphy, who is one of the heroes in this book, because he's the great genius of the 19th century American chess player, who was a genius at tactical play more than strategic play, and he excelled at what's known as the open game of chess as opposed to the closed game, and was someone who would rely on intuition as well as these kind of surprise intuitive moves that would flummox his opponent. That gave way later after the Romantic to the modern school, which was positional play and closed game, and you don't open with the king's gambit, you open with the queen's gambit because it's less risky. Her style of play, as far as I can tell, it's what appeals to me about the style of play. It's like tennis. Serve and volley, that kind of style where you go and attack the net and you rush it, and that you take risks, and you will lose a lot of points. If you can win more points at the net than you lose, then you'll most likely win the game. And that's the style of chess that she is playing, at least until Benny Watts brainwashes her that she has to become strategic and not only tactical. The modern serve and volley game in tennis, represented best by the Australian tradition, gave way to now this baseline style of play that we have today, where it's a don't miss philosophy. And the don't miss philosophy is exactly what she finds very boring in the kind of exercises that she has to do with Benny Watts. But apart from that, I think there's a poetry. I mean, poetry is one way of describing the kind of game she plays. But there's also a more intellectual, this philosophical term, which is eidetic. We speak about eidetic memory, people who can see something and remember it in all its complexity, even an entire page of a book. But she has an eidetic vision of the chessboard that enables her to abstract from the actual physical board, from the circumstance and context in which she's actually engaged in a match, and to withdraw into some place in her mind. Here I agree with Toby that the extraordinary aspect of this novel is how you can actually enter into what it's like to have an eidetic visionary panorama of a chessboard with all its many possibilities, because she can see about 7 to 8 moves ahead, and that's the most a human player, grandmasters, can do. Now, chess machines can make 200 million calculations a second these days, and there's no human chess player that can come anywhere near to even getting one game from these new chess machines that exist today. Nevertheless, for a human being, that's an extraordinarily eidetic, and the excitement is how you go through the process. This power that she has to abstract, as far as I can see, which is also abstracts her from the world, and Inga chose all the exceptional and moments in which there's actually a description of the external landscape, yeah, where there's a little bit of color, a little bit of poetry, a little bit of sentiment. But mostly, we're talking about a cold geometric logic that is murderous in intent. I agree with Toby. Your friend, who will never forget losing a game, you know, I'm not a chess player myself, but I know that the psychology of chess, it's one of the most aggressive, violent games in the most suppressed manner, where the purpose is to crush your opponent. Mm-hmm. And if you ever watch, you know, Bobby Fischer, who interviewed by Dick Cavett, he said, "What do you like most about chess, Bobby?" And he said, you know, when you start destroying the other guy's ego and he starts falling apart. We know that there's only 2 or 3 times that she loses some important games here, and the devastation that she feels at those losses is almost, you know, will undo her entire self. Right. What the author doesn't share with us is what kind of total shattering of these male egos she is responsible. There's a whole kind of slaughter, a field of demolished egos that will never recuperate from the losses that they were subjected to by her in her games with them. Because even one loss for a real champion can have something that is very destructive. So there's violence in there. Yeah. And her, the way she's better is because she has this power of abstraction. I would like to my little contribution for tonight maybe is to speak about how that's connected to being an orphan, the state of being orphaned. I agree with Toby that there's the great thing about the way this book is narrated is he uses a Henry James kind of tactic often, where you actually omit from describing what actually happened, and you only dwell on this aftermath. So, for example, when she discovers that Chabelle had all these pictures of her, and then you're in the car, and you don't realize that she's been crying in the car, you know, for several minutes until it's mentioned, you know, after the fact. But the thing that she has in common with Chabelle is that they don't talk to each other. He's just as aphasic and numb as she is. And being orphaned, this sense of abandonment, I counted 4 different moments where this is repeated. The death of her mother, sudden death, where someone comes to her door with a clipboard and announces that her mother has died, and then off to the orphanage. Mrs. Wheatley is another death that is under-described but devastating to her. We don't realize that she cried and grieved until much later. It's again omitting, we just see the aftermath of that trauma. I think Benny Watts was supposed to come with her to Russia. Okay, that didn't happen, but then someone was supposed to be on the plane, even the who is it, the American ambassador, is that guy?
Someone from the Chess Association.
Yeah, so she had to go on her own. And then in the recess of the game, with Borkov in the final game, she gets this call from Benny Watts, and there's another. All of a sudden, she has a team. She has a support group, and they go through all these plays. It costs a fortune from the other end for the and they have this whole plan. And she goes in the next day, and after 4 moves, Borkov does something that was completely unanticipated, and she found herself in the situation that she's most accustomed to, alone. Completely alone, and she has to rely on herself. And that experience of the orphanage, where she could withdraw into some kind of solitude that was defending against the world, this place of self-defense, I think translates into her game and her capacity to abstract to such a degree that she could shut out everything that is taking place around her. And I brought a quote by Colm Tóibín, the Irish novelist. And he wrote something when he was speaking about Henry James and Jane Austen. This is an interesting quote for this book. It says, "Mothers get in the way of fiction." Because when you have very strong mothers, they tend to dominate, like Mrs. Bennet and so. They take up the space that is better filled up by indecision, by hope, by the slow growth of a personality. The novel is a form ripe for orphans. And I think that's true.
Interesting.
Because it enables some kind of growth to take place in this solitary mental space. So I think that mental space of eidetic phenomenological intuition in this game is really crucial to the.
There's another dimension too. Part of what attracts her to that style of playing is just it's an attack.
Yes.
It's the attack. That's what's prized in that, and that's what she loves. And she's thrown for a loss when she can't attack.
Yeah.
When she gets mired in these middle games, and that's when she's really uncomfortable, when she's playing, and there is that kind of fury in her. And Tevis, again, I think he does this with a very, very light touch. But it's not incidental that the person he chose to tell this story about is a woman chess player, not a man, who ends up in an orphanage and ends up becoming a chess prodigy. And that really changes the deal that she's a woman. In fact, she notices it. She said it seemed to be a thing among men. And there's that incredible moment in Russia when she's walking down the hall and happens to look into Borgov's room. And there's Borgov, Tigran, Petrosian, Tal, all huddled over this board where it's adjourned and where they're going to be taking it up. And she felt as if it was her body being dissected there. And the word obscene. And that sense, I mean, she doesn't play any. Well, she plays one woman at the beginning, Parker, but otherwise, her opponents are all men, and that adds an element of interest to the novel. I think that Tevis wisely, I think, doesn't make a big deal of, because he allows us to feel that as she goes through it. He doesn't put. He doesn't put obvious emphasis on that, but we are always aware of it.
Yeah. But that makes it all the more devastating when she beats all these guys. I mean, we never hear what the aftermath of their psyche is destroyed.
Exactly.
One of them in Mexico says you make a man feel hopeless.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a good one.
That was the only.
That's a good one. But that's such. I mean, and for often such a very bleak novel, because she's alone. I mean, she is that essentially is her condition. When Borgov at the end says, "This is the best chess I've ever seen, played in my life," and
But that winning motif, because it's almost like a fairy tale in the beginning where she never loses
Right.
a match. Although it's not that unusual. The real
For chess prodigies.
yeah,
Yeah.
chess prodigies rarely will lose. But and she takes these losses so badly, as we're talking about. And then there's this beautiful moment in when she's lost to Benny Watts, and she's back in the hotel room with her her adopted mother, Mrs. Wheatley, and I marked this thing about let's see if I can find the page. It's got to be here somewhere. Let's see. She says, does Mrs. Wheatley, something about losing, and she said, "What do you know about chess? You don't know it." She's really furious. "What do you know about? You don't know anything about chess." She said, "No, I don't, but I know something about losing." And Beth says, "I bet you do. I just bet you do."
Yeah.
And Mrs. Wheatley says, "And now you do too," softly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a transmission of something essential from the adoptive
Right.
mother to the daughter, and learning how to live with loss is,
That's another strand in the novel that I think Tevis does so beautifully, which is when she starts winning and starts pulling in a little money. The first time I read the novel, I thought, "Oh, Mrs. Wheatley, you've got your Shirley Temple here.
Yeah.
Time for the cash register to start ringing." No, she doesn't do that.
I know, it's amazing.
And what I love is that Beth, you'd think, she got adopted after all out of that orphanage into this nice house, this nice room, pure generosity on Mrs. Wheatley's part. So what does she do? She cuts her in for 10%.
Yes,
I love that, an agent's fee.
Well, she thinks she should split it with her, but she doesn't want to.
That's right, exactly. Exactly.
yeah. It's that self-reliance.
Which is so true to her. It's so true to character. One of my favorite moments in here, I have to say, is the ending. You say, how do you end a novel like this?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's. Someone once said, well, you mentioned Henry James. Someone once said of Henry James, he knew nothing of his vocation but the pain of it. And there is so much, one of her dominant feelings throughout this is fear.
Yeah.
And it has to do with losing, and she has lost so much. And so the emblematic losses of chess, she feels much differently. And so there's this terror. This is work for her. And then at the end, when she goes back to that pavilion in the park and says to that old man who's sitting alone at a chessboard, "Would you like to play chess?" I think that's the first time she ever uses the word play in this. And the idea that this can, for now, be something that could actually give her pleasure and joy, and even allow her to give someone else pleasure and joy. And I love the ending of this novel.
Inga, do you know?
Well, I was thinking when you said about the self-reliance, being an orphan, and the losses, because she loses in Paris, but then what really sets her off is the adoptive father who comes. It's never described or explained, but it's after that she sort of descends into the alcoholism,
Right.
and the amount she can drink, and the cheap wine. It's just
What is it? 3 tequila
Yes.
sunrises and 4 Dos Equis before breakfast.
Before breakfast. If she has her 2 boiled eggs, as long as she has the toast, then it won't burn her stomach.
Right.
So that is never really processed either. That's a betrayal, really. I mean, that's
What is the father?
the father.
Yeah.
He
It's
never
the most
wanted to
dreadful moment for me.
Horrible, yeah.
It's so ugly.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of the defenses that she builds coming when you were talking about that. And one of them is those, the Librium, the tranquilizers, which she has very carefully organized. So that's one defense. And then the other is, in a way, that chessboard. The Sicilian defense is her favorite. And she can stand behind. But the other thing that's nice about it is that the way chess she's this poor orphan who she gives us so often we get this description of herself as a child. She doesn't like how she looks. She's got this round face and the straight hair, and she's very plain. And in a way, the chess is sometimes called the royal game. The game ennobles her. She becomes very elegant, sort of like a jolie laide. That's how I imagine her, or the French ugly beauty. She has her nice clothes. She's very well dressed, and it sort of brings her through the ranks of the world into this top position, and she can walk off in the end of the novel independently into a park in Moscow, which is really marvelous. And there are this novel, I don't know if any of you have seen the story or read the novel, it's not a novel, it's a biography, The Queen of Katwe, this young woman from Uganda who's a chess prodigy, kind of gets herself out of poverty through the game. And then this other story that I was telling about, the film A Queen to Play, which is a chambermaid in Corsica, also in a very masculine society, who makes her way and has a measure of independence and dignity and queenliness, let's put it that way. And thanks to the game.
The other thing is the obsessional thing that we get drawn into, but this is completely insane how obsessional you have to be in order to compete at those levels. Everyone that she meets after age 14 is devoted his life to chess. And outside of chess, there's really nothing. In fact, when she and Benny are holed up in the apartment, and they go hour after hour, every day, and she asks him, "Well, do you ever get bored sometimes?" And he looks at her and he says, "What else is there?"
What else is there?
Yeah.
And this idea that outside of this game, which is really a constructed game, that there is nothing, gives another indication of what it means psychically to get defeated, even once, by someone. Because there's some analogy, I'm profoundly convinced that there's some analogy between chess and monarchy. That chess has room only for one king, and the king is, and when your king is toppled, when you've lost that game, it's like, it's like a decapitation. And every ego of every grand master is monarchical in nature. And here you have, and unfortunately, there can only be one king at a time in any given tournament or thing of that sort.
That's great.
And the whole game, the royal game, as it's called, and so forth, you can get ennobled, but it's the terror and fear, which is typical the paranoia of kings, of being dethroned. That's part of the game, no?
Yeah, but in chess, it's not paranoia, it's sanity. They are after your
Yes,
game.
of course they are.
They are after
They
you.
are.
Well, I'd love to hear some of your responses now. Comments, questions? Yes, here in the front.
I had two questions about the character development. Even at the end of the book, I had a hard time remembering that she was just 19 at the end of the book, because she was so mature about everything. And she really had no role models for that. Took care of the house and everything. She just seemed very adult in nature. So that struck me as being kind of odd. The only other thing was the transformation of Mrs. Wheatley, who was this real nothing, like a cipher, and then suddenly when her husband deserted her, and her daughter started making money, then suddenly she was this, very active, and she was able to put her daughter's life together in a way that she never was her own. So it struck me, it was a kind of a false note for me, in a way, how that happened. And I was wondering what your perception of that was.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Wheatley knows she's dying at that point. And I think that might account in part for the transformation in her, I think she has a foreknowledge that she's at the end of her life. She's sick from the very beginning.
There does seem to be, because there's a point in Mexico in the hotel room, Beth says, should I get a doctor? And there's something about the word doctor hanging in the air.
Yeah.
So I assumed at that point that Mrs. Wheatley did know she was.
And her husband
ill.
later, when he comes by, he says, she was always sick.
Yes.
She was always
think
sick.
she
But
had,
Beth gave her I loved that new life that Beth gave her for a while. I mean, it was again, Tevis handles this so lightly. There's obviously a submerged story in this book about the Wheatleys, Alston, and we just get it by his impatience with this process of adoption, his silence, his almost immediate departure and never return, and you feel her changing in her relationship to this young life in her. And she didn't do it in an exploitive way. She wanted to open her life to some young life, and it turns out that this gifted young woman is going to open her up to the rest of the world in some ways. That's rather lovely, I think, and it didn't seem false to me. It wasn't something she could have planned. It fell in her. It was a grace, really.
Yeah, it was great, and it works both ways, really,
Yeah,
because
it does.
Beth is afraid, and Mrs. Wheatley's very encouraging. She organizes, because at that point Beth doesn't quite know how to. She organizes the expenses and makes all the reservations, and so in that way Beth learns from her how you do all these things.
I'm going to sneak in two questions. One is, it seems that her friendship with the black girl, Jolene, frames the story, both at the beginning and the end. And I wondered what you thought of that. And the second is, how much am I missing in this book by knowing nothing beyond the way the various chess pieces move? Right? I felt like all sorts of stuff was happening that I didn't really understand.
Well, then it would take me as well.
Yeah.
I was telling
All of us.
I was telling Toby on the second time I was reading the book to prepare for tonight. I found myself wanting the board to put some moving pieces on the board just to see, because I wanted to understand. Whereas the first time I read through that, there's a way that Tevis creates suspense that I didn't really need it, and there were enough of those details, like the ones I read to you, that it kept me hooked, and I didn't. Yeah, maybe we're missing. Maybe I don't know. Have you talked to any grandmasters?
I don't think we're missing anything.
No, I don't
to tell you. On the contrary, I was actually very happy not to know any of the intricacies, because I felt like if I did know the game much better, I would get hung up on all these moves, and I would be analyzing, and this doesn't make sense, and I would be out of touch with the novel, the narration as such. So
It's her reaction. It's her reactions as she's playing, and her the kind of emotional fluctuations.
Right, that exultation and that anxiety.
Yes,
It's a
yeah, in fact, this is something we haven't touched on, which is the role that tension plays in the novel, because his descriptions are about the mental activity, the mental concentration on the one hand, but at the same time he gets into a young girl's body in an extraordinary way, where I mean, for a 50-year-old man to know what it's the period, when she gets her period for the first time, the tension in her stomach when she is anxious and can't sleep in the orphanage, and the effect that the tranquilizers have when she takes them. It's just described that kind of organic oscillation between extreme tenseness in the body and then this kind of release from the tension that's then repeated in the chess games on the board, because the chessboard is a field of tensions between lines of forces in the pawns, and the kind of tension that the players all have. And every one of these, he's brilliant at describing, the little gestures of the losers about the hair combing and nail biting and the ruffled hair. And the exhaustion that comes from maintaining tension at that level. And she had, tranquilizers saved her life. Let's face it, it wasn't just an addiction. Without tranquilizers, she probably would have gone quite mad because she's just a very tense human. And that ability to bear that kind of tension carries her through these tournaments, which you know, are insanely demanding on concentration. And,
Right, it's the kind of compulsive intensity that makes her successful in the chess game, but that is very difficult to live with in everyday life. So that's why we get these addictions, right? But it's amazing because the very intensity and compulsion that draws her into the addictions is the same thing that can draw her out.
Yeah.
She can think her way out of all of these problems. Out of alcoholism, there's a day where she drinks, and she drinks a little less, she knows she shouldn't, and then she just wakes up and says, no.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's a process over a couple of weeks, and she ends up losing a game because of it. But
She actually has an image, a picture of her mind being sanded away.
like
by-
a Michelangelo.
Right, like
Yes.
Michelangelo, like that's right, like one of
Her
the-
genius being sanded away, just
right.
like.
Somebody did that for an art project. They erased a Michelangelo. She feels like that she's doing that to her brain. Is it too late? And just just as a writer, if someone said, "Look, I want you to write a 250-page novel in which most of the time, two people are sitting at a table, but not talking." Okay. Chekhov said you could write to write a great story. All you need is a man, woman, and an ashtray. But a novel, and it's just extraordinary the challenge that he took on in the very premise of this novel, and to pull it off, it's such an extraordinary thing.
And he pulls it off in multiple ways. One is getting into the thinking and in the tactics and the moves. But the other is also getting into her body, frankly, and how she's experiencing. And what I really love about this book is that he doesn't go into her soul. There's no psychology. There's no, and what's endearing, if anything is endearing about Beth Harmon, is that there's no selfism, which is the modern religion, the contemporary religion of selfism. She couldn't care less she's aware that there are all these people, the mass audience and everyone, she's signing autographs and things like that, but they're so far away from her, and it doesn't,
It's not really
when she
important
goes
to
and
her.
beats 12 boys, seniors in the high school, and she comes back, all she wants is those green pills, and when Jolene says, "Did you do okay?" She said, "Okay, do you have any more pills?" All she says, "Okay," but she
that's right.
there's no getting into a psyche, and there's emotion like primordial fear, elation when she wins, but and her mind, but not. He doesn't psychologize her, which I think is brilliant.
That's right.
I really did think that I played chess for a couple of years in high school. I didn't really get to the point of memorizing like the positions, like the name, using the names or the names of the kind of defenses or anything like that. But I just felt I knew the feelings were going. I knew the kind of, more than just the feeling, like the bodily reaction. I felt like, oh yeah, it's coming from over there. I got to do that. I need to think about this at the same time as that. Oh, that's too hard. There's something very. It was very, very true there, and I think it gets. Because we have not talked a lot about like. Why does it have to be chess? That's the center of this novel, and it's something that has to do like the externalization of thought. The psychology part is wiped off because it has to be on the board. It has to be real. Where somebody like Beth, who I regard as being sort of on the autistic spectrum somewhere, they need that. It needs to be outside. There's no self. There's no selfism because there's no self. She doesn't psychologize herself. So I did hear more about that. And just to hark back to Mrs. Wheatley, when you think about that, I thought, Mrs. Wheatley sort of made out to be kind of a rube, but really, she obviously knew her husband was about to leave, just before she did the adoption. She's like, I'm going to get something out of this. And then she's being pen pals with this Mexican, and then she has this torrid affair in the days before she dies. I think she's pretty good at the end game, and that's something Beth was not good at.
That's good. That's good.
Someone else.
I had a couple of points, but one of them is about addiction, the substance, which I thought was a wonderful depiction. And I thought the scene where she goes into the library and thinks about getting the pills, it's several pages in the book of her standing on the chair and reaching for it, and the pills falling over.
Great scene. It's a
Pardon
great
me?
scene.
It was a fabulous scene, and what I realized is it's one of the longest scenes in the entire book. And she had to think it through about how to get the pills, and then she gets stuck in the window, and so on. If you could speak a little bit about the world of, I don't know if I should say addiction, but I thought she had a wonderful sense of what made her feel good. And of course, the orphanage started it. So she could tell what made her feel good. I thought it was brilliant description of taking pills and feeling very good afterwards.
I want to try tranquilizer. I've never had one.
I
feel
know.
like
It made you
I want to have
like
a,
this
see what
Librium sounds like great
sense
stuff.
Of, yeah.
Yeah, that scene,
They don't,
though.
do they still call them tranquilizers, or are they called
don't know.
opioids? I guess it would be a kind of opioid.
Yes, I was wondering about the psychologizing or lack of psychologizing with Beth Harmon, but it seems like almost every character also in this novel kind of accepts this lack of an interior world. They're kind of alienated from each other. And I think Tevis, throughout the whole novel, sort of points to what's missing by not mentioning the interior world. So I'm wondering if it's also a comment about this particular time period and how people just did not connect at all on any level, and whether or not, just the subtle scenes with her reactions to Mrs. Wheatley's death and everything else. There seems to be always pointing towards what should be the connection, but isn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's part of the. It could be part of the time, but it.
Well, all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, though, there is that relationship with Jolene, which kind of anchors her and really anchors her, because she pulls Jolene back in at the end when she has a time of need. And there's real friendship and love there. And I think, though she complicates it with sex, there's a relationship which she makes instrumental, but with Benny Watts as well. He cares for her clearly. And there's even a kind of Western moment in here when the cavalry rides into her hotel room in Moscow and he works her through the moves. And he didn't do that out of anything but generosity of heart and a sense of connection to her.
Although it didn't help in the end.
Well, because it could only take her so far.
Right. 4 moves.
Yeah.
And then it was.
Moves, yeah. And then you're back with your 30 million.
That's right. But you talked about the cheesiness of the venues where these chess tournaments take place. That's in America.
In Paris, in Russia, it's different.
But in
That's
Russia,
true.
there's such a distinction between the respect and admiration for intelligence among the Russians, and this very crude American anti-intellectualism where chess, that.
That's right.
And I thought that he handled the Russians with great kind of respect.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Luchenko is one of the great characters. I mean, what a gentleman he is.
I know,
Absolutely.
so lovely.
Yeah.
And so gracious after really losing to her.
Yeah, and she hates people when she loses.
Yeah,
too.
I know.
But she's learning something.
That's true.
She's also so much younger, right? She's
That's
still
right.
a kid.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that this is a lot about introverts too, that these chess geniuses probably are pretty often introverts. So Beth is clearly an introvert, so I don't think she needs to be autistic or...
Right.
And the same with Benny. So that, moment where they have this intimate night together, and then she's sort of looking at him, gazing at his skin, right? She's feeling tender toward him in a way that she wants to touch him. And he wakes up and starts talking about chess. So there were these back and forth that it seems to be that maybe it's an immersion in this particular world of chess players, right? Where people do have difficulty maybe communicating because it's all about the mind, and it's a novel about thinking, which is why I found it. I mean, one of the reasons I found it so appealing too, and such a great novel for our time, because I think we focus a lot on feeling
Yeah.
and less on thinking, on the intellect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The first time I read the book through and got to the scene at the last battle in Moscow, it reminded me so much, or it felt like the U.S. versus the Russia hockey team in the 1980-something Olympics.
1980, yeah.
And we won. That's how I felt when she won this game. And I think at that point is when she crystallized in my mind as a warrior. That hockey match was an old school, heroic kind of game where you fight your best fight against the worthy enemy, and the winner strides from the field. And it's very different. And then I read the book again and had heard a lecture about Frodo Baggins, who was the new modern hero, and explained that, and how that image came out of World War I, where Tolkien had lost some classmates where he was, and Robert Graves's autobiography, and how the old heroic model no longer applied. The modern hero fought alone in the dark and mostly himself. And they came home to little or no recognition. And when I heard this lecture a few nights ago, I went, that's also Beth Harmon. So there is a way that I now really see her as a warrior who is a modern warrior who's fighting herself as well as her enemy because she wants to prevail. Mm-hmm. She's not there to make friends. She's there to win. And she goes through all of this loneliness and struggle and fear and non-recognition, but she gets to have the heroic win at the end, which I thought was very lovely.
One thing that Tevis doesn't do, which I also applaud him for, is that he doesn't make her into a cold warrior. It wasn't America against the Soviet Union, which if you watch the Bobby Fischer, in fact, I think Bobby Fischer might be the model for her kind of American genius coming out of nowhere against the machine of Russian chess, and it was all about the underdog American against the Soviet impersonal, mechanistic style of playing. But there's no Cold War subtext whatsoever. On the contrary, there's a kind of
she refuses it.
Respect for the Russian
establishment
of chess.
And she won't take up that posture.
No.
She refuses at some expense.
In fact, she gives the money back to the
Right.
crusading.
She almost can't go
because
she refuses to do that. Yeah.
Because of her intellectual
So in that
honesty.
sense, it's a battle with herself more than, or an opponent more than.
She gets a moment of glory.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah, she does.
I can't see who's talking here. Now you can see me. Maybe I'll sit down now. But you've touched on some of this now. When I read the book, I I think I just felt a different arc in it for myself after the book, and even now. I was very impressed by her development into a human being. And you know, you mentioned the ending, and also just now that scene with Benny. And when I first started reading the book, I thought, this is a little sociopath. And I read a lot of thrillers and watch a lot of grisly, you know, stuff on television. And I thought, this is going to get very dark here, because I just thought she was like a sociopath. And then she just started changing. And the first time I remember, it's been a couple months ago, so I don't remember the exact scene, but when her adopted mother did die, something hit her and she didn't even know what she was hit with. I don't know if she was in the bathroom or what it was, but something came over and she didn't even recognize it was grief. It was something that took her by surprise.
Right.
And then she had this sort of somewhat relationship with Benny, and then you know, and then it arcs out at the end. So when I finished the book, that was the thing that I was the most interested in, or took away with it, was this drop by drop, you know, becoming this more actualized person, although not of the self or whatever. So anyway. Over here to your right.
So I'm kind of interested in, well, first I want to say the Sunnyvale Library disappointingly did not have this book, and I had to get it through Link Plus, which really irritated me. I'm going to recommend that they get all Tevis's novels now. In what order did Tevis create? Did he start, you know, he does give recognition to these top chess players that helped him learn the game. Did he first think about Beth, the orphan that grows up, masters a skill, prevails or fails? Or did he hang out with these chess people and then figure out that somehow he had to create a character to fit into this fascination that he had with the game? I read that novelists often create characters, and they just create hundreds of characters, and eventually a story emerges from the creation of those characters. So what do you think
Yeah, I
Tevis
don't think it's
did?
a creation of characters. I think he had a love of chess, and he was playing chess a lot. The son of Walter Tevis has a beautiful letter on the website that you can read, that he wrote for us tonight as a kind of commentary on the novel, describing how his father was, he would play chess always with his father, who was quite obsessed with the game, and he would clobber his father until his father and his father's chess friend bought Modern Chess Openings. Book.
Yeah, so that's what inspired it. It wasn't a particular
Right.
character. It was that book.
Yeah, and so I think he wrote this. He created characters and things in order to write a chess novel. I think the chess came first and the characters second. That's my suspicion. I don't know.
The letter is really worth reading.
It is a beautiful letter.
I'm going to do one spoiler. There's a great joke in it. Guy says, hey, I taught my dog to play chess. His friend says, boy, your dog must be smart. He says, well, he's not that smart. I beat him most of the time. Anyway, it's a really charming letter. And it was written just for you. He wrote it for
he did.
for you to read. So about his father and about chess. So take a look at it.
Yeah, in fact, Tevis dies a year after this book is published, and it's I have a feeling that it was it could have a great sequel, because she hasn't become the world champion. She has beaten the world champion, but the world championships is 2 or 3 years away. So you can imagine a sequel would maybe we would have a fuller psychological portrait of Beth, or she would become a woman. Or, I don't know. These kind of lost opportunities in the history of literature are many, but this might be one of them. You know.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say I love this novel in many of the ways that you've been discussing. I was concerned that I lost a sense very early on that this was about a teenage girl, that after the first section of the book, I felt like this person, this Beth, could be most any age as she was going through. And I wonder if any of the three of you felt that way, or if you would like to have seen more of her as a teenager, and as a teenage girl in the book.
I know what you mean. I mean, once in a while when someone would say, well, she's 19, it would always come as because she doesn't feel like a girl, but she didn't herself feel like a girl. I mean, when she goes to the apple pie club, and there, I mean, what? This is not for me. And so she grew up fast, and her passion, which is for this game, has elevated her to the company of people who are not children, who are not girls,
right,
who are not, and so, yeah, that's what defines her. She is not defined by her age. And so whenever we run into her age, it's always gives us a little frisson, and I think that's almost intentional on his part.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I mean, I still get the sense that she's a teenage girl. She's an unusual one and an eccentric one, because she still has some teenager thoughts. Like, she thinks about clothes, the fact that her clothes are not, you know what it feels like when you're a teenager and all the kids have nicer clothes than you do, and everyone knows the store you got them from, right? She struggles with that.
And there's that charming moment right toward the end of the novel when here she is in Moscow and she wants a cheeseburger. and then she thinks, well, what kind of typical American would go to Russia and buy a cheeseburger? I wouldn't be that kind of American. And that's a teenager.
It is. There's another scene in Cincinnati where she's looking at she buys herself saddle shoes and Argyle socks, and she's just looking down at her feet, and she's absolutely delighted by what she sees.
There's a scene that struck me in this regard. Is that I think the first time she has sex, she's at a party, and she's having a joint and gets high, and then the next morning she wakes up and all the rest of them have gone away to Cincinnati. The house is a mess, and she spends the next day or two just cleaning it all up. She puts it in perfect order, and that was something that a parent would do for in a house like that. But it also shows what kind of mind, where the order that she has in her own way of thinking about the chessboard, and where she's really disturbed in certain games where she can't see the order, when things are confused in the middle, and she needs to clarify. Therefore, she has to get rid of some pieces. And the way she cleans up that house over the course of a day and a half is quite interesting.
And also puts herself together aesthetically, too.
Right.
She has a sense of exactly what she wants to look like.
That's an adult form of comportment, I would.
There was also great freedom in she being the only person in the house.
Right.
Mm-hmm. She could do it as she wanted it, or she felt comfortable with it, and cleaned it up, and got wine and drank it, and played music, and did things she hadn't done before.
We're coming to the end of our evening here. Could we take maybe just two more questions or comments?
Yes. So, as you guys discussed, and as is hinted at in the novel, chess does have this very dark side. So it's it fosters in us competitiveness and aggressiveness, and it's this closed system that if in order to rise in the ranks in the chess world, you have to be extremely obsessive about it. And I think historically what has happened sometimes with chess prodigies is after they peak, they realize that this obsession hasn't really left them with any interior resources to deal with the rest of their life, and their lives fall apart.
They do.
And the book does hint at some of these issues, like when Beth is in Mexico City playing the 13-year-old prodigy. She asks him. He says, in 3 years she wants to be champion, and she asks him, well, what then? But the book itself doesn't really answer that question for Beth. Instead, it gives us this kind of happy ending where she goes to a park and it feels open and full of possibility and happy. Do you think, to me it felt like the book didn't confront the dark side as much as it could have, or maybe the ending felt a bit like a cop-out. So I'm just wondering, did anyone else feel that way?
I didn't. I thought it allowed her a reprieve, in a sense. We know that her life will go on and that these horrors will return, but she has that one moment when she can play chess with somebody. And it doesn't falsify the experience that we don't see her fall into depression and madness at the end. I think that it's allowed within the register of what we've seen of Beth to give her that moment at the end.
Yeah.
I was going to say there are the defeats and the triumphs in chess. It's that sort of life of extremes, of highs and lows, and we do get the low where she's
sure do
sort of groveling and drowning in alcohol, and so then this last. But it's so subtle. Her triumph. It's just like the sunlight filters onto her face when she's in the park. And it just seems to me more like something like freedom or liberty than even happiness.
Yeah, because like when she's at her kind of coronation ceremony, she doesn't care for that. And in
all.
fact, I think Borgov says this isn't chess, is it? You know,
Luchenko,
to her. And she leaves. I mean, that isn't what she's in it
and she's
for.
she's not even having a drink, which is
that's right.
But it's a reminder that her future is going to be a constant struggle against alcoholism. And or the paranoia that so many chess players fall into. Bobby Fischer, I mean, Paul Morphy, Casablanca, all these people, the pressure of the game makes them a priori, all of them paranoid. And as Bobby Fischer said, sometimes paranoids are right. And the idea that someone's always out to get you. But there is that moment, it's almost like you've won a Grand Slam tournament. I'm going back to tennis. You've won a Grand Slam tournament of tennis, and then you go by a tennis court, public tennis court, and someone's hitting against the wall and said, oh, do you want to hit? And you're just kind of rallying around, and it's the love of the game.
Yeah.
And that's her true homeland is that chessboard.
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
But there's something else marvelous when you were talking about being at war with herself. So in the end, it's not only Borgov that she conquers, but while I was reading, I kept thinking how she's able to take her thoughts captive in these particular moments. When she starts to be afraid she's going to lose, like in the match with Benny, she gets nervous when he does this. He makes this funky move that is a tactic to destabilize her, and it works at first. But then she's able to get her thoughts together and take control. And the same thing with that descent into alcoholism. It's just really remarkable. And then the other thing that she has to her advantage is this friendship. This gentleman over here brought it up, Jolene, who in a way is almost like a foil in one way, because she's tall and she's beautiful, she's an extrovert, she's even-tempered. Right?
Sportive.
Yes, athletic, very able with people in all the ways that Beth isn't. And Jolene's presence in her life is a saving grace. She's the one who gets her exercising. So there isn't just chess. She also takes walks. Yeah. She goes to the gym, right? And that changes things significantly.
One last comment.
It was interesting that being the introvert that she was, sliding into alcoholism, but she knew she needed somebody to help her come up, and then she went and got Jolene, and Jolene really saved her life.
Yeah, she waved her hand for help, and she got it. Well, this has been...
Well, yes, thank you all for coming. The next book is very different, a very different world, but well worth having a look at. So I hope to see you all on May 1st for the next one.
Thank you, Cynthia.